I'm Barbara Lee Van Horsen. I am the experimenter at the Momentum Center, which is a grassroots movement to create a stigma-free community, and the convener of the Anti-Racism Task Force. So all of the organizations that you see on the screen are part of that task force. I invite you to visit them and to thank them for their participation in these really important conversations. A quick warning, we have been Zoom bombed in the past. We have put security measures, everything we can in place, but it's not 100% fail-safe. So we do have people on security. If somebody enters the meeting and violates our rules, they will be removed as soon as possible. Tonight, our topic is racism and the justice system. We started talking about that last month. Our focus tonight is incarceration. And again, I want to shout out to all of the members of the task force, all of the organizations and the individuals who make this possible. In addition to having our conversations, we're always looking for action steps. We believe conversation is an action. It's through relationships that we create change, but we also want to look for those other things that we can do in response to our conversation. A big focus of our town hall is the community conversation and trying to stimulate creative ideas for change. Some of the actions that have come out of these conversations so far is we have a very robust resource list at this website. We've started a community book club that Wes McGee is leading, and they are reading the book Birth of a White Nation. It is available at the Bookman, and we will include information in the packet after this meeting about how you can get involved with that book club. We also added a report and action option. So when you register for a town hall, you have the opportunity to record what you've done since the previous town hall. And I wanted to share just a couple of those. One of them that we received was that this person read the new Jim Crow to prepare for the next town hall. Somebody else joined the book club, How to Fight Racism. And a third person said, I've continued to organize the Vigil for Peace and Justice each Saturday in Grand Haven and have made it a point to stand next to the Black Lives Matter sign and hold a sign with a message of equity and justice for all. Now I will also try to make signs which point out the systemic injustices in our justice system and which support all of our citizens and residents who are so negatively impacted by white supremacism. So I want to just invite you to use that button, record your actions so that we can share those here and know that we're not alone in our efforts and our attempts to create change. And finally, we're working right now on a workshop all about having conversations about race. That's come up in several of our town halls, that people feel like we've created a safe environment here for these conversations, but they want to take that out into their other relationships, other conversations. So we're in the midst of planning that workshop and we'll keep you updated. Tonight, as we talk about incarceration, we have two just fantastic panelists. I'm so excited to hear from both of them. The Honorable Judge Greg Pittman will be talking to us from the 14th Circuit Court Family Division in Muskegon, and Matt Chapkus, the Director of Humanity for Prisoners, are both here tonight, and I'm just delighted. We'll also have an opportunity after the formal town hall ends to continue with casual conversation. I know Matt is available for that. So when we're done, if you want to hang around a little longer, you're welcome to join us for that. Here is our agenda. First, the welcome. I'm going to go over some instructions, and then we're going to hear from our panelists. We'll have a Q&A period. Some of you submitted questions beforehand. The chat box is available, so ask your questions in the chat box. If you want to direct them to specifically Greg or Matt, just please indicate that. And we'll go through as many of those as we can while we have time. If we run out of time before we've answered all of those questions, we can address some of those in casual conversation, and the others we will ask for a written response so we can send it out in the packet to everybody afterward. We also will have breakout sessions after Q&A, so you'll be randomly assigned to a small group conversation. We'll report out, and then we'll have a few polling questions and talk about next steps. So a few instructions: please stay on mute unless you're asked to unmute yourself and speak. Please turn on your camera if you're able to. I know that sometimes we're in the middle of different obligations outside of the conversation, but it really does help that spirit of community when we can see each other's faces. And that's particularly true when we go into the breakout rooms. So if possible, please try to keep your camera on. We do have closed captioning. You do have the option of turning subtitles on or off. As I said, submit your questions or your comments to the chat box. To participate in the breakout sessions, you do need to have the Zoom app downloaded. So if you're just working out of your browser, you won't be able to go into those conversations. We are recording this conversation tonight, but we don't record the small group conversations. We'll be recording our panelists and our main speaking and our reporting out session. And we'll be providing that to all of you. We'll be sending you the recording, any chat questions that needed to be answered after the fact, any materials that are referenced and recommended, all of that will go into a packet and be sent to you. And we finally have ground rules and communication guidelines to go over. We review these every time we get together. We really are working to create a safe space for people with divergent feelings and views to be able to express themselves so that we can engage in genuine conversation. And we hope to invite more and more people into the conversation that maybe haven't been in the conversation before, that this is a new place of discussion and discovery. So the first rule is that we're here to be honest. We're not here to debate who's right or who's wrong, but to tell and share what we honestly think, believe, and have experienced, and to be willing to listen to the experiences, thoughts, and beliefs of others. We value equality. We do have panelists who are expert in their area, but we're all equal and valuable contributors to the conversation. Respect. All of us have preconceived ideas, and they can get in the way of our listening to each other. So we want to be aware of that so we can remain respectful to ourselves and others at all times. We want to practice active listening, which is a real challenge in our culture, especially in a virtual format when it's so easy to multitask. So I want to challenge us all to try to really be present and to give our attention to what is being said rather than what we might want to say. Responsibility. Every one of us has hot buttons and they can get pushed or triggered unintentionally. If that happens, we want to be able to own it without blaming anybody else for it. So we take responsibility for our words and for our emotions. And finally, this is a shame-free zone. Shame never leads to constructive change. If anything, it pushes things deeper under the surface where they can just continue to fester. Again, we really want to create a place where people are safe, exposing the thoughts and the feelings and the questions that maybe you haven't felt comfortable asking or expressing before, in a place where we can unpack those things in safety so that we can look at them and decide what we want to continue to carry with us and what we might be ready to leave behind. This would be a good time if you are not comfortable with any of those communication guidelines or ground rules to excuse yourself from the meeting. Because we do take our ground rules very seriously. I hope that you're all on board for this. I hope you're all buying into the ground rules. And if you are still in the meeting, I assume you are. So thank you. Thank you for being here. We do have an opening polling question to kind of survey the room. And it's a two-part question. The first one is just, what is your level of confidence talking about race and racism on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is I have no confidence at all, and 10 is I'm completely confident. If you would just choose from 1 to 10. And the second question is about the presence of racism in our community. Do you think it's not present, minimally, somewhat, regularly, or always present because the issue is systemic? So if you would just take a moment to answer those questions, and you do have to hit the submit button after you choose your 2 selections. And we're about 72%. We'll leave it up here for about 10 more seconds. So please select and hit submit. And we'll close it in 3, 2, 1. So I like to share the results and give you an idea of the room. Most people right now are feeling about an 8, but you can see we have a number of people at 3, 5, and 6. So again, we hope to increase people's confidence in talking about race and racism. And we can see that in the group right now, 76% see racism as a systemic issue. Oh, and I lost my screen. Jenna, is my screen still shared?
Yeah. I'm going to put on the polling question though. You're muted, Barb.
I don't know how I became muted either.
So your screen is gone now.
Okay.
We have your face and you are not muted anymore.
Okay. So we're going to get back to our slide. And I apologize for that. There was a new function in Zoom that let me download the polling results. And apparently when you download the results, you mess up everything else. So I am not going to use that function again. What I am going to share is a statement that was put together by the Anti-Racism Task Force in preparation for tonight's event, and a very short 2-minute video. This is the statement they prepared. Historical events related to race, such as slavery, Jim Crow laws, redlining, and mass incarceration, have had negative effects on people of color for generations, beyond the event or racist policy itself. While we were not a part of those historical decisions, we are an important part of the decisions made today and into the future. Let us widen our perspective now as we watch a short video clip illustrating one way today's inequities have historical roots. This video is called Convict Leasing: Black History in 2 minutes or so. While slavery was legally abolished, the prison system became a legal replacement for forced labor. The relationship between the two is important to understand as we dig deeper into race and incarceration.
The labor system that took shape in the late 19th century developed coercive means to ensure that cotton remained king. It was called convict leasing. Get arrested on a minor charge or a trumped-up charge, you could find yourself locked up and then hired out to a corporation bidding on inmate labor. The pipeline from prisons to profits in this country has deep roots.
The aftermath of slavery was in some ways worse than slavery itself. Unlike before, when someone who owned you, driving you too hard was counterproductive because you would lose your investment, convict leasing was different. You could get them cheaper, and if you actually drove them to death, there was more where that came from.
In the 13th Amendment, which ends the institution of slavery, of course, there is a loophole. Convicts who have been convicted of a crime, they actually can be forced to work for free.
In Alabama in 1850, 99% of the people who were incarcerated were white. In Alabama by the 1880s, 85% of the people incarcerated were black. So we could have a debate about how many of those black people were actually innocent, or we could have a conversation about the use of the criminal justice system to target both the innocent and the guilty alike. That continues all the way to the present, where even today, about just under 40% of the nation's prisoners are black, and yet the African-American population is about 13%. They are snatching up bodies everywhere to fuel this system.
The idea in which more money can be made out of their incarceration is still very much part of our criminal justice system.
And with that, I want to turn things over to our panelists tonight. And Matt Chapkus is going to speak first, Humanity for Prisoners. Matt will have 13 minutes. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen because we don't have slides tonight for speakers, and that'll allow you, you can do speaker view. And Maddie, if you want to put up the timer, you may. But Matt, please share.
All right, thank you so much. My name is Matt Chapkus. I'm the president of Humanity for Prisoners. We're based here in the Grand Haven Spring Lake area, and we work one-on-one with prisoners on non-legal issues they face. We only work with people in the Michigan Department of Corrections. And so when Barb asked me about this, specifically the incarceration part, you know, as a white dude, I can't speak a lot on racism in some ways, but I thought I knew a lot of people that can tell me things and that can help me learn. And so I learned a little bit just putting this speech together. And I want to talk with you a little bit about some of the experiences I've had here. I've been with this organization for 10 years now, and I've seen a lot of things. And I actually go back as even into my youth to talk about how incarceration was used. And I want to compare two friends of mine in their situations. And so friend number one grew up in a pretty normal situation with married parents. He graduated high school, but he started having a drinking problem as a teenager in his late teens. He got into trouble, a couple of minor in possession, a couple other run-ins with the law. I think he had a DUI at one point, and he just kept getting probation, and he'd get a little fine here and there, and he'd do his probation, and he'd be back to it. And then into his early 20s, he's drinking again, and then he started playing with firearms. And he showed his friends his gun and accidentally realized he didn't have a bullet in it and shot a friend in the hand and caused a lot of injury. And still, he got a high court misdemeanor and a few years of probation, and he was off. And unfortunately, his addiction kept ruining his life and making things worse. And a couple of years later, at the peak of his addiction, he caused physical harm to one of his own children, and he lost custody of that child. And he was incarcerated. I'll talk to you about his incarceration in just a minute, but first I want to talk to you about friend two. Friend two grew up in a rough situation. He didn't have parents around. Mom was a drug addict, dad left. He bounced around from home to home, didn't graduate high school, got picked up for petty crimes. And at age 18, he was needing some money to go buy some liquor. So he and his buddy grabbed a pellet gun and went and robbed an ice cream cart. They took $28.50 and a box of ice cream sandwiches. And then as they were leaving, some kids approached the ice cream cart and they wanted some ice cream. And the person running the cart's like, they just took everything. And so the guy, my friend, called them over, sold them ice cream, gave them back their proper change. And then he and his friend left and they took off in their car and they got picked up a couple hours later. Now, one of these two friends that I talked to you about got a life sentence in prison with parole. And my other friend got 364 days in jail. My friend number one's white. He served his time. He turned his life around. I'm incredibly proud of him. And he used 364 days in jail as a big part of turning his life around. Friend number two served 40 years in prison for robbing $28.50 from an ice cream cart. He's African American. He was released just a year ago on parole. He's just trying to get his life back in order after living in the system for 40 years. That's not an equal way to distribute justice. That's not an equal way that we're using our incarceration system here in the state of Michigan. And that's just an example that I'm seeing, and that's more from a personal experience. I asked some clients what they would do. We work with over 5,000 men and women in the Michigan Department of Corrections. And I expected to get a lot of stories back, you know, about name calling, racial slurs, and we do get plenty of those. We get those on a weekly basis. But a couple of my friends that I asked are long-serving prisoners. One has been in 45 years, the other 25 years. And they shed some light for me. And I'm actually gonna read from their letters to me and let you hear from them exactly. So Big Ben's been in 45 years, and he starts by quoting the Bible. He says, "Any kingdom divided by civil war is doomed. A town or family splintered by feuding will fall apart." And that's from Matthew 12:25. Big Ben says, "After all is said and done, we are, like it or not, members of the American family. It's time for us to accept that. As a person of deep faith, I believe in that decree. I believe it because I know I couldn't have survived more than a half century or nearly a half century, in one of the darkest, most evil, wickedest environments humanity has managed to construct, the American prison system, a holdover from its dark slavery past. In terms, excuse me, sorry, just lost track of Ben's letter there for a second. In terms of the criminal justice application, have you ever wondered why Michigan's African-American population is about 13%, while the prison population is over 50% African-American? And have you ever wondered why the vast majority of correctional facilities are located in outlying rural, mostly white communities? These are subtle forms of structured racism that have been practiced for political benefit and financial profit for decades. For example, take a small community like Kinross in the Upper Peninsula. In the mid-'80s, when auto manufacturers began using lighter weight synthetic materials, they had a high unemployment rate because they were an iron ore mining town. To help, the state replaced those jobs with clusters of state-operated prison facilities. In this aftermath, a couple of dynamics came into play. In 1973, there was only one prison in the Upper Peninsula, and that was by Marquette. By 93, that number was 6. By total, I think it grew up to 8. It is back down to 6 right now. For the state, it created jobs for those UP communities by embracing the passage of new drug laws, tough on crime drug laws with long sentences that guarantee a steady supply of prisoners from urban areas instead of recognizing the drug abuse for the medical problem that it is. Also, it inflated the UP community's population numbers, which gave them bigger financial capabilities since state profit and sharing grants are allocated based on community's population density. Basically, prisoners are considered a part of the community wherever they're housed. So this means better political representation in Lansing, since the allocation of state reps is based on the same formula. And because prisoners are counted as those communities, grant dollars that should go into the urban communities were instead directed to these communities where the disenfranchised prisoners are housed, but have no say voting-wise in elections and do not share in communities' windfall prosperity. So that's Big Ben. He's got a lot to say, and he really opens my eyes a little bit more. We've always heard about the problems with families trying to get visits up to the UP when we've got a lot of prisoners. About 35% of our prisoners are from Southeast Michigan. And the one prison in Southeast Michigan is in Macomb County. There was one in Detroit. They just closed it recently. So the facilities and the way we use those is another piece of the system. My friend Herbert, he's been in 25 years. I had a chance to speak with him and his wife. Herbert talks about a lot of things, but one of the things he really talked about was visiting policies. And I'll read you his story. Visiting policies, even before COVID, were atrocious. The public hears the MDOs say visits are important. They want to keep the continuity of families as a priority. But if you've ever visited a prison, you know how far that is from the truth, especially in northern prisons. Guards don't see many Black or Hispanic people in their communities. They tend to treat them with disdain and disrespect that wouldn't be there if there was more oversight. I was written a ticket, this is Herbert, he was written a ticket for over-affection for kissing his wife at the end of a visit. Unbelievable. Phone calls are monitored, incoming mail is read, pictures of our wives aren't allowed, and yet men are allowed to buy magazines depicting women posing in ways our wives cannot. The pat downs and body searches of our family members before visits are almost criminal and mostly happen to Blacks and Hispanics. This is allowed because officers have no more respect for our facilities than they have for the prisoners they oversee. So Herbert sees it. Herbert's wife, Bertha, also sees it. Bertha was a really interesting conversation for me. She married Herbert after he went to prison. She served in the military. She worked 25 years for the post office, and she's taking care of her money. She's well off. She's taking care of herself. And Herbert used to talk about the trips that Bertha would go on with her families, and guys would never believe that an African-American woman could go on those trips and do those type of things, especially if she was married to a prisoner. The guards, every time Bertha would go in for a visit, the guards would tell her, "Oh, he's never going to change. He's where he belongs. He's never going to get out." Meanwhile, after the visit, Herbert goes back and the guards are telling him, "Yeah, she's never going to stay with you. She's a hoochie. She's never going to last with you." And the staff was so blown away that Bertha had financial means that a staff member of the Michigan Department of Corrections drove to her house because she provides her address on her visiting application, drove to her house to make sure it was really her house because he didn't believe that a African-American woman could live in a well-to-do neighborhood and be married to a prisoner. We've got to hold the Michigan Department of Corrections more accountable as well. A news story just from last October from the Detroit Free Press. I'm going to read just a very small clip of it here. A Michigan prison supervisor who admitted using the N-word at an MDOC Christmas party is facing allegations of racism from former corrections officer who is Muslim. Court records show this captain, Frank Sawyer, who admitted in sworn testimony he had used the N-word racist slur between 30 and 100 times, did not lose a single day's pay as part of his discipline for using the word at the 2017 department event. We've got to hold people to a higher accountability. That starts with the people that are working for the Department of Corrections. They need better training. We need to tell our state reps and our state senators that they need that these are issues that are real, that we care about. You know, I could have gone on and on. I've done, I think, 11 minutes at this point. I know the timer's running. Barb's not going to let me go over time. There's more and more stories. There's more and more layers to this. This is just the outside of you just can peel away. It's like an onion. You can get deeper and deeper into it, and it does bring tears to your eyes. It's a system that's broken. We each have to recognize our role in the part, and part of that is who we vote for and what policies we support and things like that. And we can start making a difference, though. It takes a little bit from each of us every single day. I really want to thank everybody for the opportunity for listening to me ramble on here. Check out humanityforprisoners.org to learn more about what we do. But now I'm going to send it over to the judge.
Thank you, Matt. I just want to remind everybody, if you have questions for Matt, make sure to put them in the chat box, and we will do the Q&A after we hear from Judge Gregory Pittman. So please take it from here, Judge.
Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate it. Thank you all for the invitation. Thank you for being a part of what I think is a very courageous a courageous level of conversation and discussion that must occur. Matt, thank you for your hard work and doing the kind of work that does not garner headlines. I imagine you're probably not compensated very, 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 very well. But this is the kind of work that makes a difference in people's lives at many levels. More levels than probably some people really even appreciate. Real briefly, my name is Gregory Pittman, as you indicated. I'm born and raised in Muskegon Heights, graduate of Muskegon Heights High School a long time ago, getting further and further away. And went on to college at Michigan State University. And then from there, I went to law school at Indiana University. Wanted to be a lawyer from the earliest moment that I could start thinking about what kind of a career I wanted. I was impressed with the men that I saw walking around in these suits who people seemed to listen to and respond to in such a deferential and respectful way. And that triggered something on the inside of me. So Matt shared some direct information from people that he is working with who are incarcerated. My point is how did they get there? How did that occur? And how does it occur and continue that there is this incredible disparity in what the numbers of minorities, specifically African Americans, I'll focus sort of here today. That's my experience as an African American. How is it that the numbers in society are so incredibly exponentially increased in the incarceration rate. Well, one of the things I think that you folks who are involved here and who are taking part and are serious about coming here and having these discussions and being educated and educating as these discussions go forward. One of the things that I think you have appreciated, if already or will appreciate, is that this systemic racism, this systemic issue, this broken system is what? It's people. There is no institution without people. There is no system without people. And these systems and institutions that we look at in this sort of monolithic way are about the people who inhabit them. So we get here because of people. We get here because somebody along the way in those systems who we're depending on to do things in a certain manner choose to do them in a different manner. Why? They're afraid because of maybe seeing and understanding that the way of life that they may have been used to at some point in the past is beginning to take on a different look because of the diversity of the communities and systems and institutions that they're a part of. Maybe it's because of what we started with the video that we saw, which kind of stole a little bit of my thunder. I'm kind of adjusting on the fly here because part of the idea that I was going to share with you is that our ideas of the justice system, which ultimately results in where Matt is devoting so much time in incarceration, comes from just the basic ideas of what slavery used to be about. Our systems of policing come from considerations of what slave catchers were all about way back in the day. Our system should be based on the very simple idea of what's right, what's wrong. If there's a right that we recognize as a systemic and societal standard, and when you run afoul of that standard, there is going to be a penalty or some kind of a sanction that is going to be imposed for being on the wrong side of that standard. I don't think that's a wrong thought. I don't think that's a wrong idea. It's kind of, we are responsible for taking care of ourselves and policing ourselves and being accountable to one another as citizens sharing the same communities. Where it begins to go askew is that the considerations of what's right and wrong is codified, it is put into statutes, which we call criminal laws, by people who have an experience that doesn't maybe necessarily appreciate or understand the experiences of more than just the community that they come from. We then get laws that are a bit askew in how they are drafted and created because they come from a certain perspective. And that perspective is a little homogenized, and it doesn't have the diversity that it probably really needs because of history. Black people weren't legislators. Black people weren't decision makers. They were the people who were given the decisions. And not being in that room creates a great opportunity for that room never to have considered the perspective of anything other than the people who are in that room, who all, for all intents and purposes, have looked the same and come from the same places. So the law is then created and given to institutions for enforcement, which essentially is, we're talking about the police, which again come from certain places that the people that they are going to be responsible for serving don't come from. Then you move from the police to, at some point after the enforcement, the interpretation of that law in our courts, which again comes from and is inhabited by people who kind of don't come from the same places that the people who are answering for those behaviors come from. And that continues to be perpetuated over and over and over and over. And what we get is we get further away from understanding and having the diversity of thought about how these systems should serve the people who are part of these systems. And it becomes entrenched that this is what's right, this is what's wrong, this is how it should be enforced, this is how it should be interpreted. And when we get to the end of the interpretation, there's a consequence to pay, and that's the incarceration. So I want to end, I think I got about 3 minutes left or so. I want to end with a bit of examples myself. I know of a guy who is home on vacation from school, doing nothing except being out and about, who gets pulled over by the police under the pretense that he is probably drunk, needs to step out of the car and begin to partake of these field sobriety tests. Luckily, that person was smart enough and knew enough about what was going on to ask the kinds of questions that maybe might get a person into a lot of trouble these days, and was able to stop that effort to begin to be incarcerated. I know of a guy who took a job in another city before the apartment that he was going to live in was available. He had to live in a hotel for a couple of weeks and work out of that hotel. One night he comes back from going to get a meal, and as he pulls into his parking stall, police come from both ends of the parking lot, block him in, pull their guns, and ask him, what is he doing here? Because we've gotten reports about a person who was suspicious. Luckily, he knew enough to be able to talk and get himself out of that situation. I know of a guy who began his career as a lawyer, went to a pretrial conference, went to the window where he was to check in. The person he checked in with did not even look at him, just said, "Oh, stand over there, your lawyer will meet you." Folks, that guy was me in three different phases of becoming who I am today. And it all stems from, at the very bottom of it all, people. I won't say that they were racist, because I don't know that much about them. Well, here's what I am absolutely convinced of, and I think I'm convinced of as it relates to what happens in our systems today. May not necessarily have been racism, but it was an incredible level of indifference to who I was. Indifference is as dangerous to the issues that we speak of today as racism. These people did what they did, treated me the way they treated me, dealt with me in the manner that they dealt with me, maybe because they were racist, but certainly because they just didn't give a darn about who I really was. And they weren't held to be responsible to have to account for me. It's not that they hated me or didn't like me. It's just that they didn't really even think about me. And I'll leave it, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Powerful presentations from both Matt and Judge Pittman. Jenna, I know you've been watching the chat. Do we have questions to pose to our panelists?
We do. Let me get organized here. Okay, so for Matt, question is, how and why did you get into this line of work?
Oh, okay. I'm not going to give the full story because there's a whole book about what my dad did to start this stuff. But my dad started this organization, and we're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. But we actually started as a nonprofit called Innocent, because my dad was working with a wrongfully convicted man named Maurice Carter, and he was innocent, and they were going to start a whole nonprofit together that was going to work on innocence projects across the country. And my dad realized he's not an attorney, and you really need to be an attorney to get things overturned in a court of law. And so he turned this experience that he had with Maurice into finding this niche where, you know, there are men and women in our system who may be guilty, and they're still being treated absolutely, completely poorly in the system, by the system. There are so many flaws within the system. And so I kind of sat and watched that in college and watched this all unfold. I wrote a speech on it in college. And as life unfolded for me, I developed a lot of different abilities, but I never really found that good full-time gig. And my dad said, why don't you come work with me for a little while you're figuring things out? And that was 8 years ago now. And so here I am. And we touch a lot of lives, and I've been able to take what my dad started and really run with it for a while, and look forward to doing that for quite a while longer here.
Thank you, Matt. And this one's for Judge Pittman. What is the most effective way that we as individuals can work to dismantle the racism that is built into the judicial system and our current penal system?
You need to unmute yourself, Judge.
I was kind of making a joke to myself. I'm like, that's not a substantial question at all.
Yeah, can you be concise?
Well, you know what? In the context that we're speaking here today, this is one of the things that you do. You show up. You ask questions. You have to speak truth to power. You have to make the people who come to us and ask for our votes, ask to represent us, people like me as a judge who wants to be a part of the system and make decisions. Don't leave after the election is done and we've ascended to the bench and we've gotten the robe. Show up and ask questions. Why are you making decisions the way that you're making them? What is it that you're thinking about when you're making those decisions? Who is it that you're speaking with when you're not a part of the bench or on the bench, but a part of the system that you work in? And I'm alluding to the idea that one of the values that I see in my presence on the 14th Circuit Court is that I bring a perspective to my colleagues that those who are willing to listen are able to get a better understanding of some of the people that appear in front of them, and makes them a bit more sensitive to how maybe to deal with some of the issues that they deal with. I think that's first. I think the next thing is that it's been said over and over that if good people refuse to do good when they see wrong being done, it helps none of us. It's not enough to be outraged when we see a young man take 7 bullets in his back by a police officer where there's absolutely no weapon involved. It's not enough to be outraged on the other end when we see a young man who has committed a first-degree rape of a young lady given a probationary term because he's got a good future ahead of him, and I don't want to get in the way of that, which is a case that occurred a few years ago in California, as I'm aware. That is where we have to organize and begin to say, if that's the way you're going to this office or these offices that you've chosen, then we need to have you removed by the means available, the ballot. We vote, we organize, and we continue to keep asking those questions until people are accountable for what they do, as opposed to just simply doing what they do.
All right, thank you, Judge Pittman. And then back to Matt. Has Humanity for Prisoners sent in some of the stories that you shared in your presentation to the Attorney General's office?
Not the stories that I just shared in my presentation, because honestly, I got most of them in the last 3 days. Typically, we don't get involved in legal matters. We advise our clients on how they can report those type of things on their own, because we don't have the lawyers and stuff here. We do make sure, but our role is doing things like this, where I can tell people these stories and people can hear more about it and raise more awareness of these issues, because these are experiences. This is experiences of 2 of thousands of clients that we have. These stories are a dime a dozen for them, sadly. So directly, no, I have not. Yes, we do make sure that they get there if they need to.
Judge Pittman, your hand is up.
Yes, I wanted to speak to one other thing that I think is important regarding the last question, because I think it is a very consequential question. One of the things that I don't think is really appreciated is that crime occurs and people are absolutely responsible for committing those crimes. The disparity comes in how those crimes are dealt with. The police write the report. The report is provided to the prosecutor's office for review. The review results in charges. The charges result in a case before the court. The court is then responsible for a decision. But if you start in the wrong place, you're going to end up in the wrong place. You hear the term over-policing, where instead of using some of the means and alternatives that the police have at their disposal to deal with issues of criminal behavior, they go to the farthest extent of imposing their authority in that situation. Case goes on to the prosecutor's office, and instead of looking at charges that are specifically tailored to the fact pattern, they charge the most serious thing that they can possibly charge in hopes of getting a plea bargain down into something that might make sense. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But now we've got a over-policed, overcharged case that then goes to the courts to be dealt with by a jury that probably does not look like the defendant. It's not a jury of their peers, who then apply a decision that allows a judge to make a decision about sentencing, and has, although the sentencing guidelines exist, the discretion to depart from those sentencing guidelines as they choose. Over-policed, overcharged, underrepresented in the court process, and then left to the devices of a person who may or may not be sensitive to what has actually come before them. What does that result in? It results in people that Matt is working with every day.
Thank you, Judge Pittman. Let's see. Okay, so another question for Judge Pittman. Let's further explore indifference versus racism. You were different than what was expected. You were other. Isn't the treatment of others due to differences what we call racism, homophobia, ableism, ageism, sexism, etc.? Many feel that it is important to call out these inequitable treatments of others for what they are. Indifference is gentle, but what is the word strong enough? What is that word strong enough?
Well, I think it reaches people who are not necessarily open to the idea of being labeled as racist, or it takes people away from their defenses immediately going up when it's brought to their attention that, I don't really give a whole lot of thought to who these people are and what they do. And it opens up, I think, another avenue for people to be able to look at how they view things and how their behaviors are, without feeling like they have been judged in a manner that automatically puts them behind the 8 ball. So I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. I'm trying to give people the opportunity to take a good look at who they are and what they do in a way that may not be as threatening to them, but does eventually give them the opportunity to modify or at least consider their behavior the next time they're in a situation. We want results. We want people to move from where they are, and we want them to move to a place that helps move our very diverse communities forward.
Thank you. This one's for either of you. It seems like harm reduction is becoming more mainstream as communities start seeing addiction as a health issue rather than a criminal issue. Are either of you feeling hopeful about the direction that it is headed, or do you think it is too far off?
Matt, I'll go first, because it really is beginning to take a hold at my level, at the judicial level. We're having, I think, a great reaction, a great response, and an expansion of the concept of specialty courts that are dealing with the issues that people have versus simply fashioning a sanction and passing them on to another part of the system, which is usually imprisonment. Drug courts, sobriety courts. On my level, we've got truancy courts and mental health court for both juveniles and adults. Those are things that begin to get to the core of what allows for the behaviors that wind up becoming criminal for people. And that's a good thing. And I think there is an appreciation for that is moving in the right direction.
Yeah, the judge is going to be able to give you a lot more information on where that part of things are at. I know that we're hearing a lot more about it. I know that we hear from our clients that, man, they wish they had those opportunities when they were going through the system. And so I guess in that way, we know that something must be working because these guys are hearing about it, and it is working for the next generations that's going through the system. So yes, progress is definitely being made.
Yeah, well, you can appreciate that it's working because the legislatures are continuing to make it a part of the budgetary process. We can talk all day, but if the money doesn't follow the concept and the sentiment, it doesn't go very far, and it is. So it's now becoming pretty clear through evidence that it is cost effective and it is helping the bottom line for our state. And, I kind of don't care how we get there as long as we continue to keep getting there.
Thank you both for your responses. Again, this one is for both of you as well. What are your thoughts and what data is available for the school to prison pipeline in Michigan?
Matt, you want to go first or you want me to go?
I'll let you take that one again, Judge, if you're willing.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting question for me because when Governor Snyder was in office, he commissioned each county to establish what he called a school to prison pipeline prevention plan and team. And I headed up that team for Muskegon County. And we were one of the lead programs in this state. We called our program the Stay Projects, and it was a pilot project that we used in 4 school districts: Muskegon, Muskegon Heights, Holton, and Orchard View. That covered 2 inner city schools, a rural type school, and a suburban area type school. And the idea is that if we are able to keep kids connected to their school experience, it stops and helps stem the flow, the easy flow when they are expelled and removed from their school experience, that becomes that pipeline that leads them to behaviors that send them on to prison. And that's the concept that we were working from. Remember, I just said a couple minutes ago, when the money follows the concept, you know that is the people are taking it seriously. The money did not follow that concept. And school to prison pipelines activity is still ongoing, but it's on a more random county by county basis based upon the engagement and investment of those counties in that same thing. It is an important concept. It is a concept that if we get a hold of it and grab hold of it and really make it work, we get a twofer. Not only do we stop the explosion in prison numbers, we increase the educational value of the experience of young people and give them more tools that keep them forever away from having to be incarcerated. But it takes people like us, you, telling our legislators that you got to start putting some money into the concept in order for it to continue to take hold and have some effect.
I'm just going to go ahead and second everything the judge just said right there, because he gives really good answers.
I'm just old, Matt. That's all. I'm just old.
All right. Well, we have another question for you, Judge Pittman.
Okay.
Are there Know Your Rights programs available to educated high school or college students? And if not, how can we get those started?
That is absolutely phenomenal. And that is something that we sort of began down that road a bit a few years ago with our local bar association to get lawyers involved in volunteering some time in our schools to give a bit of civic engagement and understanding about what it's going to be like when they leave our schools, you know, and how to handle themselves in our society and that kind of thing. That too did not go as far as it should have gone, but there are some good teachers in our communities, specifically places like Montague. I think they do a wonderful job. Muskegon has done a wonderful job. Orchard View has done a wonderful job in connecting with the legal community and trying to get those types of things off the ground. So how can you help? There in Ottawa County, here in Muskegon County, approach the local bar association president and tell them we want lawyers to engage with our students and help them understand what what their basic rights are from a perspective other than a textbook, so that they will know and become better understood, better understanding citizens when they walk across that stage and get their diploma.
Thank you. Another question, I believe, for you. Let's see. So can you speak to how we can support correcting the systems and getting innocent people out of prison? So just a little background too. The Innocence Project estimates over 300,000 innocent people are in prisons in the US. Can you speak to the support correcting the systems and getting innocent people out of prison?
Yes. First of all, I would say you can certainly support Matt Chapkus and the Humanity for Prisoners program, because they don't deal with the legal issues, but they are working with those people, those folks who are incarcerated, on all the other life issues that they have to deal with, along with the legal issues. Secondly, I think it is very, very important to talk to our legislators about making more moves legislatively, as they have done in the recent past. A good amount of legislation has been passed to make sense about how you deal with people who have been convicted of things. They're making it easier for expungement. They're making it easier for people who have driving offenses to be able to work through those and get their license back, so they can then go to work, so they can then be productive. And so they get off this merry-go-round of never being able to get a license, and always suspended, and always in trouble, and always got a warrant, that kind of thing. The next step has to be that the legislatures start to look at the ideas of what's going on with the ability to prove the innocence of people. We have DNA evidence that now becomes available, but there's such a process to get it through the court system that, and then when you get to the end, judges are still reticent to accept the DNA evidence that proves that someone else committed a crime, or the person before them did not commit the crime. We got to make that easier. We got to make it more incumbent upon prosecutors to take more responsibility for not trying to simply justify or protect the convictions that they have garnered, but be more open to the idea that their job really is to present and get justice for the circumstance. Prosecutors are really, they're really engaged in the idea, and they are rewarded for getting convictions. And that makes them reticent to accept the innocence of people when innocence has been shown. If we got some legislation, maybe they would feel more comfortable in doing that and changing that routine.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Pittman and Matt, for your answers. Very, very helpful. If people have ongoing questions, please feel free to submit them. We are going to go into our breakout rooms. And then, as I said, we'll be able to have a casual conversation after 2 if people want to share their personal experiences. But right now, I'm going to assign you. There should be 6 to 8 people in your room, and there'll be some dust settling. So if it turns out there's only a couple there, hold on and we'll do some reassigning. But right now I'm opening all the rooms, and I invite you to please go into your breakout. You'll have a facilitator in there to help guide the conversation. Welcome back. I hope you had really good conversations. We're going to do a short reporting out now, an opportunity for each of the facilitators to share just one of the suggestions that was made for question 3. So this is just a 10-15 second report out from each of the facilitators, and I'll call on the facilitator by room, and we just want to hear one suggestion that was made for something we can do. And we'll start with Brian in room 1.
So we came up with, we as a nation need to look at other nations that have successful systems, ones in other countries, and move from a system of penalties to a system of humanity. People's
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. And group 1. How about Carrie in group 2? Carrie, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. We had a great group. It was so moving. But basically, we all need to learn the history, the systemic history of this problem, and put more resources where our mouths are. And
all right. Oh, that's just one suggestion.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Thank you, room 2. And make sure that those are all written so we can send all of those to the task force. How about Timothy in group 1? One suggestion.
One suggestion is make sure all of us as good people, when we see bad things, report it.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Timothy in room 3. How about Caleb in room 4?
Ours was very similar to room 1. We talked a lot about restorative justice. And there was also the term circle justice, which is along the same lines, but comes from the Native American justice system.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Caleb. And room 4. How about Mary in room 5?
Well, we want to connect systems together to get them talking. We think the police and community mental health and the school systems and the justice system all need to be talking together about how we can see the connectedness between what is happening in society in terms of justice.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary in room 5. How about Monica in room 6?
So we had a fabulous conversation. One of the suggestions that came up was really getting kids involved after school through churches, community centers, finding real productive spaces for students.
Perfect. Perfect. Thanks, Monica in room 6. Hey, how about Greg in room 7?
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, we had a great conversation, and we're fortunate to have Matt actually in our group. And so we really focused a lot on, as the judge pointed out, the legislative needs to support specialty courts and eliminate the cash bail system.
Great. Good. Good. Thank you, room 7 and Greg. How about room 8 and Carolyn?
Hi, yeah, we had great conversations like always. It's just crazy, but to really help those in the system with more rehabilitation services and action-based services as well for helping them when they're going to get back out.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Carolyn in room 8. And Emily in room 10.
I'm not sure. Emily just said that she's having audio problems.
Oh, okay.
I have her, she put it in there, the summary. Solutions must recognize that the justice system and the people involved are part of a community and society. Alternatives to mass incarceration must mobilize many parts of our society and apply interventions that are not simply punitive.
Okay. Thank you for relaying that, Jane. And thank you for Emily and group 10. Please, facilitators, make sure that you take all of the notes and you forward those so that we can share them with the task force and cultivate from those, cull out of those additional action plans that the task force can be about. Have a couple of closing polls. And the first one is a repeat of our first questions. So having had this conversation, how do you feel about racism and its presence in our community? And how comfortable are you now talking about race and racism, more, less, or the same? If you would just take a moment to answer those questions. Make sure you hit the submit button. And we're close. We'll just give it about 10 more seconds. 90% of you have voted. If you haven't voted, please do. It helps for our statistics and our reporting of impact. Okay. Thank you. And I'll share the results. 75% now reporting that they believe racism is always present as a systemic issue, and 73% report feeling more comfortable talking about racism. The next question has to do with just your evaluation of the event tonight. Was it not at all helpful? Did it make you more aware? maybe motivate you to take action, or convince you to become or continue as a leader or an advocate. And you can choose more than one for this question. And we're almost there. We'll give it just about 5 more seconds. All right. And to share those results, we have 55% more aware, 59% motivated to take action, and 76% wanting to continue or become an advocate. And the next question has to do with a next town hall. So would you be interested in participating in another town hall meeting on race and racism? And if so, what topics are you interested in us addressing? And please choose all that you are interested in. And we very intentionally use this feedback to guide our decisions as we plan the next town hall. Now, I will tell you, we continue our series on justice next month, and our focus will be on returning citizens. But we have lots of topics we can continue discussing. We're only about 57%, so I'm going to leave this up another 10 seconds or so. Choose all that apply, and then make sure you hit submit. And we have fewer people voting here, but I'm going to close it in 3, 2, 1. And this is always gratifying to see that everybody's interested in continuing the conversation. And we see racism and religion as the topic that most people have chosen, 69%. That's very helpful. And the last polling question tonight has to do with what action you're willing to take. And again, this is multiple choice, but are you willing to learn more? That was one of the suggestions made. Engage in more conversations. Engage in more conversations with people who are not the same race as you. Participate in a demonstration, perhaps the peace stand that was mentioned. Support DEI initiatives at school or work. Attend implicit bias training. Get involved in your local government. Donate to a group working for racial justice. Join the community book club on race and racism, or invite other people to this series of town hall meetings. And again, you can choose all that apply. What action are you willing to take? Conversation is an action, but there's also other things that we can all be engaged in. And I'm going to leave this up for about 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. And the most comment here was engaging in conversation with people that are not the same race. Really like seeing that. Also higher DEI initiatives at work and school, engaging in conversations about race and racism, and reading and listening and learning. So thank you all for that. And if you haven't read The New Jim Crow, which was our suggestion for tonight's meeting, then I encourage you to do so. As far as next steps, I mentioned at the beginning that we're going to send the recording, the slides, the chat questions, all the materials that we gathered here tonight out to all of the participants. Any questions that were asked that we didn't get answered, we will ask our panelists, both Matt and Greg, to reply to those so we can get you that information. And then we're going to be reviewing that feedback. We have a debrief meeting of the task force tomorrow, and then in April, we'll have a full meeting to work on additional action plans. So be assured that there's a lot of work going on in between these meetings. Another step for you is to report an action. If you've committed to doing something, do it. and then report it so we can select a few of those and share them and know that we're all working together in this community to affect change. I want to thank Judge Pittman and Matt Chapkus for being our speakers, our panelists tonight. You guys just did such a wonderful job of humanizing this complex and heartbreaking issue. And it's so helpful to have your personal testimony as well as your expertise in these matters. So thank you for being here. Thank you for our sponsors. I'm sorry, the makeup, the people who make up the task force, all of these organizations. When you're out and about, thank them for their participation. And I want to invite you to the town hall next month. It'll be Monday, April 26th. It's always the fourth Monday of the month. And again, we'll be talking about racism in the justice system, this time focusing on returning citizens. And with that, it is 8:07. We're going to take a 5-minute break. If you want to get on with the activities of your evening, please feel free to do so. Those who want to stay for casual conversation, we will start up again in 5 minutes. Thank you so much for being here. The divine in me recognizes and bows to the divine in you. Namaste.